Well, here we are, back again. So yesterday we prepared this here, and we thought a lot about it. And I want to review it first, and then think about a few of the implications, and then try to poke holes in it, basically. That's usually a good idea. Okay, so review. We have two types of sources for fragments: components, and we have pages. This is a page component, which makes this more complicated, but you get the idea. We get different types of fragments. We have static fragments that never change, where the hash is basically just the equivalent of the string value. And then we have dynamic fragments. And for the components, dynamic fragments means that they probably have some form of scope. And like it is shown down here, it's just an abbreviated example up here. There might be sets in there. And components, I guess, also have like arguments, input. So that makes it a little more complicated. But for the page fragments, we then have the same thing, but we also have arguments in the path, like the UID of an entity page defines the ID of the entity. And as we go through these fragments, we find fragments with a scope, and they might, in the scope, use the UID. That's kind of the most complicated version of a fragment I've come up with so far. And these get turned into fragment containers, or fragments, whatever. They have an ID, and the subset of the scope that the fragment is using, the hash value of that. I'm still tired. The subset of that gets an ID. In that scope, we isolate the references and the expressions. References being references to actual data, and expressions being derivatives of that data. And then we might have the same fragment content, but really tired. Jesus, need more tea. More tea. So you can imagine that we might have a component that also leads to a fragment, and if it's like repeated on a for each, then you might have the same fragment over and over again, but the scope is slightly different. And that's one of the, I guess, hardest examples that we need to figure out as we implement this. The whole purpose of all this is that we want two main uses of these templates. Jesus. The first one being, we want kind of normal HTTP GET requests that give us a template. In getting this, the user provides the UUID, and that can be fed into concatenating all the fragments and evaluating the fragment details. The other one is if the user posts a change to the data, or another user, or if changing the data updates the data itself by state chart action, then data might change, which leads to references being updated. So in this case, maybe the user changes the name property of this entity. And so every reference to the name property of this whole thing gets updated. And that leads to a fragment update. And the fragment update is something that we want to hit the browser. And for that we need the path. And this is why I'm so tired. I don't know what happened. I'm way tired. I'm just reviewing my convoluted fragment logic. So we want the user to get an update for this fragment of the page if we have a change in the data that is referenced in it. And for that we need to know if a user is on a certain path is this here, that holds this fragment. So when we compile the fragment, and I have to implement that. I mean, I've already implemented a version of this, but it's not perfect yet. So the whole point, just to break it down for you again, is the user has two use cases in my engine. One use case is to get a full page, so they want to edit an invoice in the backend, so they go to secure path something invoice / the UID. And so every entity in secure path entity something, I didn't update this, yeah. Hang on, this should be entity, same thing here. They want to see an entity, and so they need this template to be compiled. And by requesting this page, he makes an entry in his own presence list, and that gets put into a presence pool. Yeah, this is, as you're talking about optimization, this is also my optimization, because we only want this fragment to be updated and updates being delivered to people who actually care about the fragment. So for that we need to know the use cases of this fragment. Yeah, Facebook is also done in PHP, or was done in PHP, and then they invented their own C++ compiler for PHP, which was funny. Yeah, they did. What was it called? Hang on. I'm blanking on the name right now. Hip hop, right? Yeah. And then it kind of got folded back. Yeah, so the vContractor guys, they basically just built it properly from the beginning. And Facebook, in typical American fashion, just did the easy thing and then let some nerds figure out how to optimize the easy thing so that it's almost as fast. Which is, I mean, I'm using PHP as well. Because I am a monkey. And PHP is so well optimized these days that, I mean, you can probably get like 20 or 30% more performance out of a proper compiled version of that. And there are some plans that I have to take parts of this and like run them in Go or something. And the other thing that I'm probably going to do is at some point, this whole thing that you see here, this list of fragments and a table of fragments, could be something that is delivered to the client so they just do their own templating. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of doing that as well. So all the data in here is just data that sits in the cache and in the in the memory for the worker threads, because data isn't that big. Yeah. So what I'm mostly concerned about is how fast can I produce this here, and how fast can I produce an update to a portion of that, so that the user, whenever something changes, they get live updates. And for that, I need to know who is interested in these updates. I need a presence pool where browsers have registered that they need updates for a certain thing. And when an update gets triggered by a change to an entity, a fragment gets updated. And if there is interest in that fragment, that gets pushed to the interested parties. Isn't GUID just like a special case for UUID? I recently saw that they have like UUID version 8 or something that is also linearly, what do you call that? It's numbered linearly, so you can sort them by origin date. I don't know. And I think this will actually get a little more complicated. So this is what I'm trying to poke holes in this for now. One of the things that I'm not entirely sure about is whether I actually want to hold pages in cache, or whether just getting fresh copies of the fragments and concatenating them is as fast as the other thing. But you have to always keep in mind that I've been working on a version of this and simplifying this for about 7 years right now. My first impulse is that I've probably stripped away enough complexity as it is right now. Yeah, cache might be that, but you have to keep in mind that a template might literally be hundreds or thousands of fragments. And if you already have all the data, for instance, in cache, in RAM, then just printing out a string might be as fast as looking the thing up in the cache that already has the string printed. And I still think that the cache will be faster, but at some point I want to actually prove that it's faster. And the other thing is that while there are thousands of fragments in here, most of that is just static content. So then you kind of don't need all this complexity for all that. So the thing that looks complicated here is like 20% of the action that happens in compiling a template. Yeah, sure. I have that open. Like this dashboard, for instance, that is already compiled. So I think I left the traces in there. Yeah, this already has fragment IDs. This is kind of the prototype version of this. So there's nothing that you can see live or anything, but the dashboard template looks like this. So you have a navigation, and then you iterate over entries in that navigation. And this gets turned into this, and then you have components in here that print out icons and titles and stuff. And here is the icon, and this is the icon. And the icon is just a reference to a component that looks like this, and that pulls in the SVG file with this template, with this icon name. So in here you say icon is the item.icon, and in the menu you have entries where you have like duotone folder plus, and that would be not this one, but where's orders? Orders up here. So this is file invoice, so this icon gets printed out like this. So what you want in the template in this place here is a reference that tells me I need to just copy the content of an SVG file in here. That might be an application of this logic. So when it goes through the template list of fragments, there's an entry that says literally take this SVG file and just echo it. And the resolution that tells me that it's simply a file path that I need to include here is what happens in this fragment logic. And then you would obviously, it literally just string concatenation. It's very simple. This is why I think I've kind of dug down this idea to the bedrock now. It just ends up being strings. Why do I get the unofficial sun? Can I also get the official sun? But hello there and good morning. Damn it. Well, I need you to work on that then. String. This is my fever dream. You're in my fever dream right now. It's not echoes, so there is no generated. I thought originally I had it like echoes, where it would be a template that just gets, I don't know what you call it. You just run the template basically in the previous version. But what I'm doing right now is just I keep an array of all the fragments and then I concatenate the array. Now this is what makes me want to code. I want to implement this. Maybe right now. Pre-allocate. No, I just keep everything in RAM. It's literally just. So there is a get cache function that tells me get the cached version of this fragment if it gets put into this list of fragments. Let me show you. There is somewhere here. This. No, wait, this is not it. This one. It says concat fragments, and in concat fragments, I go through the fragment IDs, and then I pull this from the fragment array, which is just a global. And before that, I just put all the different fragments. Let me show you the cache. The cache is just, you put things in cache, and putting things in cache means that you put it into a global array. Well, it will be precompiled. So I have a precompiled version for all the recipes. So if you, for instance, I don't know, what would be a recipe? It's a copy. I don't know. With a Streamified template, for instance, there is a compiled recipe to build a path. And I want to build the same thing for the fragment. So there will be a compiled PHP file where if I get to a certain fragment hash, then there is a small exec function that gets run for that. And the result of that will be put in the cache. And that's what the hypermake event loop does. It prepares all the fragments in advance, and then compiling them is just concatenating the individual fragments in there. So the end result of going through this arcane Byzantine nightmare will be another compiled file that holds all the fragments, and you just step through them in order as they are displayed or as they are listed in the template itself. Which mostly means that most of these are just statics. Because if you look at the dashboard again, for instance, like most of this is just entirely static. This is static, this is static kind of with an input, but you can compile it to be static. There is no logic in here, basically. So the column template is somewhere in Bootstrap. There is a Bootstrap component column, and it's just a div that tells me the scope input of this. So the width in here will be turned with a function into a col minus, I don't know, 12. And then there's like width SM, and that's like 6 or something, that gets turned into just static fragments. And the few things that are actually dynamic, they come in through setting variables and then using them. So that means when I'm doing this fragmentation and I'm going through the individual things, I keep track of what's in scope, and I'm putting navigation in scope here. So as I go down, I know that navigation here is the same thing as navigation up here, and I don't need to run through this sequentially because I have resolved at the compile stage what every single variable means here. Every single fragment gets its own little scope that is compiled from the context in the template. So you could basically compile all the fragments in parallel, which usually means they're just done in advance and put into the cache. But you could parallelize this, and that's how you get actual speed, because otherwise you would need to go through this. Or the classic templating approach is to just compile this into code and then go through this sequentially every single time, which means every single time you step over all these nodes that are just static as well. But I don't want that. I mean, it's not a big performance hit, but I still don't want that. I just want to turn people into dinosaurs. Yeah, but you get these fragments, and the nice thing about having completely isolated fragments is that now the fragment itself has a reference on data, and so you can figure out if the data changes, I need to only update this single fragment, and you can deliver this update via a push function to the browser that is listed in the interested parties. So I don't know, if we were to change the content of this title here, we might just want to update this one single fragment that has an ID. So in the end, what we want up here is a path. So the path that we're on would be secure/dashboard.html, and you have a hash value of the fragment ID, and then a selector like inner HTML, and we literally just want a string update for that. So on the client side, we can say an update came in. We can do a simple select on this element, and we want to change the value in this element, and that's it. So you get very, very, very small updates pushed from the server. You don't have to change the whole tree or keep like a virtual DOM or anything. It's even on the browser side, it's just string concatenation, and that's very fast. And again, you could also, from the result of all this fragmentation, you can have a compiled version of the entire fragment structure in the backend. They could deliver that to the client and let the client do the templating itself. So they could also run this if they wanted to. I might end up building like a JavaScript framework out of this that just does the thing on the client side. And then the server basically only has to tell the client, we have a data update here, and the client can say, okay, I just need the data changed, and I can exchange my own fragments. Which is where the server starts to get bored, because all it does is just deliver very small updates, and the clients do the whole work themselves. That might be a use case for this. But to do all that, we need to go to, hang on, let me run this actually. Hypermake. Because we're now at the stage where we are splitting up a template and we go through the individual parts and we are registering the fragments. And in the fragments we should have scope. Yeah, so this is a fragment. We don't have references. It's curious. That might be an issue. We have a this is the template, and we are setting something into the template. So we want to have the config in there, because down here you have an if case that uses the config. So now I want to tell the registering of the fragment I'm using that. And the weird thing right now is that I don't have a reference. But I'm pondering whether I even need an explicit reference entry. I had this I'm copying this code from a worse version of this, where I kind of did the same thing, but bad. Yeah, you can, every single, what I want to have in the end result, like let's take a complex template. Like in here, if I'm printing out, I don't know, I have a backend field that takes an order and wants to print out the name of that order. Where's admin component backend field. So I want to print out entity field, the field in the entity, the property of the entity. And I want to know in this whole, so this value, this small fragment here, that would be this. And it would have a reference that knows that entity is actually something in the database. And if this changes, and it's like not just JSON, but like name, if the name changes in here, and I get, like if I update this with a post request, I want to know that this fragment changes. Yeah, database. The database is just JSON files, but you could also use a classic database. But the data usually is just in the memory. Yeah, it's fully end to end. Every single thing that is dynamic can be updated with a very small push update from the server to the browser. I want to destroy web development. I want to kill it stone dead. It's one of the biggest things in my life is that I'm supremely annoyed at how complicated web development is. Like if you look at all the frameworks like React and Svelte and all the server-side nonsense that people put into this, it's literally the simplest thing in the world. You need make to make all these parts, and then you need this update logic that just does the thing. And that's all there is. And people are reinventing this wheel every half year. Yeah, I know that there are similar ideas. It's just that I've also looked into Solid.js. I think what they usually don't get quite right is this approach of just treating everything as a very small fragment. They are usually, I'm not fully sure if it's the same thing with Solid.js, but usually they have their own document object model that they update, so a kind of virtual DOM that they work on. And I'm just doing strings. Just this is very simple. It's mind-blowingly simple. All this stuff. It literally just string concatenation. Get the scoping right. Resolve it in compile time. Have a proper data-oriented thing. Hey Ro, how are you? Because I'm tired. Well, this is dynamic stuff, basically. Well, the dashboard graph, for that usually, if you really have like a JavaScript component that uses a JSON file, for instance, that has the data, you just deliver the data. Like in your, you would have like a function, like if you use, for instance, what's it called? Graph.js? No, it's something else. Chart.js. Chart.js, if you build the graph initially, it would request a JSON file from the server. That would put an entry into the presence pool. So the server gets told, hey, this user up here is listening on this thing in the database. So when this thing changes, deliver an update of this data. Or tell the user you need to invalidate and recall the data or something. So then your included part of this chart.js thing can either update the data or refresh the data or something, and just refresh. And that's it. And if you want fine-grained updates, you could say like, if it's like an array of entries, you could say whenever I change this, I copy the atomic update and deliver the atomic update to the client. And that says to the client, hey, you need to put this new entry into the array. And that's it. You just deliver data. It's just data. It's very simple. And I think this is also why I'm using a make-like structure. Everything is just a path. As I told you before, like in this, I mean, it's a static example, but you can see how this might be dynamic. If I pull in this menu.json, then update to this file, change the stuff that is in there. And I just need to figure out individually whether I need to update or not. And then I can just deliver that to the client. And if you're in... my goal is to make a lot of money with this. And the most likely case right now is that I will just keep it proprietary and just have a public demonstration of this and tell people how terrible all of their approaches are and that they need to get good and do it like this. Because this is literally like 7,000 lines of PHP code. Then that's all there is. You can implement this like in a week. You can have ChatGPT deliver this in like 5 minutes probably. We don't have a problem of we don't have too few solutions. We have so many solutions, but the problem is that we are solving the wrong problems. Because nobody is getting that this is actually a very simple make-like structure that you have to split into small parts and update. And that's all there is to it. What do you mean? You have to read them, right? That's complicated. That is complicated, I mean, yeah. So do I even need references, the question? Yeah, do you get the idea that programmers are not very good at communicating what they want to say? I mean, this looks complicated, but is actually quite simple. It just looks a little bit complicated because I'm listing different cases of fragments, but just split it into parts, keep a list of the scope, isolate everything into fragments, and concatenate them for a GET request, or update parts individually. That's all there is to it. I think you can understand this, right? It's not that hard. Well, what am I looking at? Okay. That does look simple, yeah. What do you use it for, though? I mean, what is being mapped here is the question. We have a function defined in a while. Okay. Ah, right, yeah. I mean, kind of, that's what this is in the end. I have these HTML files, there's just fragments, and it's just a mapping of hashed fragments into a list. So you can also decompile from that. And that's what you can kind of see in this. Every fragment has an ID. Although I need to change this because I don't need that for static fragments. So we get to here. We now have a fragment. And we have a scope. And the scope is this. So this is wrong, because we might not have the scope yet. It doesn't look that complicated, to be honest. And you have like 87 lines, and Rich has 140. So it's 1.5 times as complicated. Oh, almost twice as complicated, I guess. He also has more comments than you have, though. So giving some credit. Okay. Yeah, that's probably faster. That is probably faster. So we in here need a scope hash, and for that we just wait, I had a hash function. What was it called though? We want to hash the scope. Well, if you can boil it down to math, then yes, that would be faster, definitely. That is definitely faster. So in here, if it does not exist yet, we want to pull it in here. Ugh. Yeah. Every time you use an object, you're now in object-oriented world, and that's usually bad. That is usually way bad. So what would a fragment be? I'm not sure what I even want to erase here. But for now we'll just pretend like I want that. Then I have scopes. And scopes are just this. So the next one, if I have a scope, then I want to get a hash of that scope. And then I want to put this in there, I guess. I'm right now just preparing the fragments. I will compile them later. So it's good that I have the scope hash, but now I want the fragment key, no, fragment ID. I want this, and then I want to have a scope entry for the scope hash, and only if I don't have that yet. Right. So let's go here. This does not have scope, which is fine for now. But in this other case, we should now have an entry. Oh, we have a lot of fragments. We should now have an entry, or a bunch of entries that have scope. Do I use the... Oh, where's the hash data? False. I want a slim hash there. We want this, and the fragment key is what? You are 42. How fitting. Not the last one, so that's fine. You have a scope in here, and the scope has an hash, and that's where we have our references. Get a bunch more here. Wait, that's not true. We do have scope here, but we're not using the scope. So we need to figure out what we need to let in scope. So we actually want to be here. And then we need to take this. We can actually just get the vase, right? Yeah. So right now what I'm kind of doing is I'm at this stage where I want to compile this, and I'm taking the entire scope. Now I want to figure out the subset of the scope that I actually need, because there's a lot of junk in scope that we don't need. And we want to whittle that down to the stuff that we actually do need. Kind of. So what do we do? Expressions, do we interpolate them? Do we split them? I think we split them. It doesn't work. Well, that is fast. If it doesn't work, there is no work done. So it's if you're using no CPU at all, then that's perfect, basically. It's mathematically perfect. Okay, so I can go through, let's do used scope as an array. Then for each IPRs. Oh, we can just we just do used scope where we just want this list. Right. So we have a used scope, and now, oh, well, this might get a little more complicated, but we now have a fragment. Let's do context scope is this, and scope is an array. Then for each use scope as var, we want to have a scope entry for the var that is context. Context scope var. And now we're dead. Have you asked ChatGPT about it? Whenever I have a problem with JavaScript, I usually ask an LLM because I just can't be bothered. Wait, but you're not doing it in JavaScript, right? I don't know. Maybe. As I'm waiting for my IDE to boot up again. We want it to be here. Right. Source. Why do we have so much context here? Oh, this is the context scope. He is doing it wrong. Rich Harris. Yeah, but doesn't isn't base 64 terminated by a semicolon? Or am I getting no? Wait, it's an equal sign, right? Or am I getting it wrong? Ah, okay. Well, Rich Harris needs to get good. Why is he doing that though? I am blind. No, this one here, right? Ah, okay. So this is where it ends. Why does he do that? Maybe he's feeding them in with a semicolon at the end to know when it stops. Probably. Right? I mean, that's probably what I would do. Just to have an end marker. Huh. Oh, we have a special case here, actually. That's good. We have a special case because there's something else we need. We need vase. We need vase. I am AAA. Even the fact that everything is typed here annoys me. It's just, this should be so simple. Why is everything a class? That's developer stuff. So the case I'm hitting right now is this, where I have an input to a fragment. I'm literally pulling in the source. And only from the context I know what that is. Where am I actually? Somebody needed a cuddle to get back to sleep. The stream is going to end soon anyhow. But we got until this point, which is good. We got all the way to when we hit the first complex part. How do we denote this? What is this? Is this scope? But it is part of the scope entry. Which is fine, I guess. If I unpack this, I can know that everything that is null is something that needs to be provided in. Yeah, because this expression only needs this input. I think this is fine. This might be fine. Well, tell him that his stuff is bad. I mean, it's also archived, so. Decode object lookup faster. Why are mappings always decoded into dense arrays and not sparse arrays? That's old stuff, 2020. And most of the issues are just developer stuff. Yeah, do that. I'm interested. So we don't need it for us, it's fine. We don't need it. It's scope stuff. Okay, so this is working. That's good. Let's get a bunch of these and look through them. Well, let's jump to the thing. Ugh. Where's my other breakpoint? Yeah, we lost it. We lost it, but we need to restart the IDE. We were in some if case. This one. What kind of fragments do we have? And as you can see, most of them do not have a scope. Some do, like this one. Ooh. God, this is so much stuff. Just all text nodes. This is boring. Let's go to the next one where we actually have scope. Yeah. Let's die later, please. So right now we are only doing all the components, I guess. But why are we dying? Oh, the other thing that I figured out yesterday is that I'm always looking at these timings here to see how fast it is. But it's even faster if you run on the command line, obviously. So these timings are usually like twice as fast. So that's fine. Why are we dying? Oh, okay, that's wrong. What do we do here? What is the content? The content is the scope. Ooh, that's wrong, yeah. That is wrong. Else doesn't have content. So that should fix that. To 931 PHP. To 931. These are both null. Ah, dang. That's a disappointment. Okay. Oh wait, I'm in here. I wasn't doing this before. That's possible. I mean, who's developing algorithms these days, huh? You could just generate them. And you can probably tell an LLM to generate this, right? Yeah, probably. But I would wager a bet that you can tell ChatGPT to generate this for you and it would just do it. Wait, why am I even running this? That's kind of bad. Shouldn't it be sufficient to just put it in scope? Like this? And I think we don't need the references, actually. Oh, okay, yeah. So you're still trying to get some developer experience with dealing with WebAssembly, which makes sense. Okay. So kind of am curious if I let's see how far. Look at that. Okay, these are fast because they are small, but I want to compare like this one. Yeah. So in debug mode it takes 80 milliseconds, and without debug mode it's like 25 milliseconds, which is still probably too slow, but it's plenty fast for now. But everything else is just like milliseconds. All these components are very small. It's not much work. So where am I dying now? Ooh. Null given? Why you null? There's a lot of them too. Hang on. Clean the log, try again. Fatal error. And no jump point. See, I need a mapping right now. What? 11:22. You are expecting is null. Why are you null? And why are you even evaluating this? Where am I? I'm producing a fragment stream. The thing that I think I won't need even. This is an extra step that I will probably just skip. I still want to know why it's null though. It has no scope, it has a hash. And the hash is what? This one. That should be get cache. That should have a result. Oh, this doesn't exist yet. Do I make this? No. So I have a dependency on a list right now, and the list should be empty. But it's not made in advance because it hasn't figured out that it needs it. So somewhere in the D file that should have listed this, it's not in there. Right. I guess this will be what I do tomorrow, because it's 6:10, and it's wakey time for everybody else in this household. We got a lot of stuff done today. Let's pull this one back up. We basically got this part done. But we are still, as we are compiling the template, we are right now putting in the URL representation of the fragment. And we actually just want, oh wait, one thing we do want is, we want, wait, is it template? Oh, register fragment, register fragment. So this is just the key itself, but we want to return two things: fragment ID and then the scope hash. The scope hash is usually null, but it might be a thing. And then the next step, we can, instead of stacking the URI of the thing, we could just be stacking the result of this. And then we just have it. Something like that. But that's for tomorrow, David, to figure out. For today, I'm done. Save this. Just marvel at it once again. And then we're going to end the stream. You've done enough for today. Yeah. Thanks for hanging out. And I'll be back tomorrow. Hopefully. I'm still very tired. I don't know what happened. See you tomorrow. Take care. Bye bye.